Cops laugh at a poor black man, then learn he's their new chief. The police station buzzed with chatter and laughter as officers gathered near the front desk. It was an ordinary day, until the station door swung open. A black man in his late 50s walked in. His clothes were simple, a worn-out brown jacket, faded jeans, and scuffed shoes. His posture was calm, his eyes scanning the room. The laughter got louder. One officer smirked. "You lost, old man." Another chuckled. "Maybe he's here to file a complaint or beg for spare change." A third one scoffed. "Sorry, buddy, no handouts today?" The man said nothing. He just stood there, observing. But in just a few minutes, their laughter would die in their throats, because this man was their new chief of police. The station was alive with energy. Phones rang, officers joked, and the air smelled of fresh coffee and old paper. It was a normal day at the precinct, until he walked in. William Carter, a black man in his late 50s, stepped through the doors. His clothes were simple, a worn brown jacket, faded jeans, and scuffed shoes. His posture was calm, confident. But to the cops at the front desk, he looked like a nobody. Officer Bradley, a tall, broad-shouldered man, was the first to speak. He smirked, crossing his arms. "Hey, old man, you lost?" Laughter followed. Officer Daniels, sitting behind the desk, shook his head. "Maybe he's looking for a free meal." Another officer, Murphy, leaned back in his chair. "Or maybe he's here to report his missing teeth." The group burst into laughter. Even the desk sergeant chuckled. But there was one officer who didn't laugh. Captain Harris. He stood near the back, watching the exchange with narrowed eyes. Something about this man felt different. But he said nothing. Not yet. Carter remained silent. He looked around the station, taking in the faces of the officers. The arrogance. The way they laughed at someone who, in their eyes, didn't belong. He wasn't angry. He wasn't surprised. He was studying them. Finally, Officer Bradley stepped forward. He slapped a hand on Carter's shoulder and grinned. "Listen, buddy, unless you got business here, you should probably head back to where you came from." The laughter grew louder. Carter glanced at the clock on the wall. Just a few more minutes, because when the doors swung open again, everything would change. The laughter echoed through the station. The officers, caught up in their mockery, didn't notice how Captain Harris remained silent, or how William Carter never reacted. He just stood there, watching, listening, waiting, and then the station doors swung open. A group of city officials entered the station. They wore crisp suits, their polished shoes clicking against the tiled floor. Their presence alone shifted the atmosphere. The laughter died instantly. The officers quickly straightened their postures. One of them even adjusted his tie. Because high-ranking officials didn't just walk into the station without a reason. Something was happening, something big. And then the mayor himself walked in. A hush fell over the room. Even Bradley and Daniels, who had been laughing just seconds ago, stiffened. The mayor, a tall man with silver hair, cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. Today is an important day for this precinct." Every officer in the room held their breath, because they knew today was the day they were getting a new police chief. And that meant one thing. Power was about to shift. The mayor turned to Carter, and what he said next sent a chill through the room. "It is my honor to introduce your new chief of police, William Carter." Silence. Utter, painful silence. Every officer who had laughed, smirked, or made a joke felt their stomachs drop. Bradley's mouth hung open. Daniels went pale. Murphy looked like he wanted to disappear, because in that moment they realized the man they had mocked wasn't a lost old man. He wasn't here to beg for help. He was their new boss, and they had humiliated themselves in front of him. Carter finally spoke. His voice was calm, deep, unshaken. Interesting first impression. The weight of those words hit hard. The officer stood frozen in place. No one dared to speak. Carter took a slow step forward. His eyes scanned the room, locking onto each officer who had mocked him. Bradley swallowed hard. Daniels lowered his gaze. Murphy fidgeted nervously. Even the police chief, who had said nothing to stop the mockery, shifted uncomfortably. Carter stopped. Then, with complete authority, he said, "I came in here today to see how I would be treated, not as chief, but as a man." The officers felt their throats tighten, because they knew they had failed that test miserably, and now they would have to answer for it. The air in the station was thick with tension. No one spoke. No one moved. The officers who had laughed, mocked, and insulted William Carter just minutes ago were now standing in stiff, awkward silence. Because now, they weren't just looking at a man in an old jacket. They were looking at their new chief of police. And he wasn't smiling. Carter let the silence stretch. He wasn't in a rush. He wanted them to sit in their own shame. Finally, he took a slow step forward, his deep voice breaking the quiet. "Officer Bradley." Bradley flinched, but he lifted his chin. "Yes, sir?" Carter's sharp eyes met his. "Tell me, when you saw me walk in, what did you assume?" Bradley's throat tightened. "I thought you were lost." Carter nodded slowly. "Lost?" He turned to Officer Daniels. "And you? What did you assume?" Daniels' face was red with embarrassment. "I thought you were homeless." Carter's gaze didn't waver. "And you?" He looked at Murphy. Murphy shifted uncomfortably. "I thought you didn't belong here." Carter inhaled deeply. Then, in a calm but commanding voice, he said, "And that, gentlemen, is the problem." The words hit like a hammer. Carter turned his back on them and began pacing slowly. "You see, the moment I walked into this station, you judged me. Not by my actions, not by my words, but by my appearance." His voice was steady, but the weight behind it was undeniable. "And if that's how you treat a man who walks into your station without knowing who he is, then I have to ask." He turned sharply. "How do you treat the people in this community when no one is watching?" The room was dead silent, because now they were really thinking about it. From the back of the room, Captain Harris finally spoke. "Sir, I'd like to say something." Carter nodded. "Go ahead." Harris took a step forward, glancing at his fellow officers. "I've been here for years, and I've seen how things work. There's an attitude in this station, a culture that needs to change." He looked at Carter. "And if you're the one to do it, then I'm ready to stand with you." Carter studied him. Then he gave a small nod. "Noted, Captain." The officers shifted nervously, because Harris had just done something none of them had the courage to do. He had taken a stand. Carter faced the room again. "Let me be clear." His voice was firm, unwavering. "I will not tolerate disrespect in this department. Not toward me, not toward each other, and especially not toward the people we serve." He let his words sink in. "I don't care where you come from. I don't care how long you've been here. If you want to stay, you will follow my lead. If not," he folded his arms, "you know where the door is." A heavy pause, then slowly he scanned the room. "Starting today, this station is changing." The message was clear, and no one, not even the most arrogant officers, could deny it. Bradley's jaw was clenched, but he nodded stiffly. Daniels, still embarrassed beyond words, muttered, "Understood, sir." Murphy swallowed, his earlier arrogance gone. One by one, the officers responded. "Yes, sir. Understood, Chief." It won't happen again. And just like that, the power had shifted. They had laughed at him, mocked him, disrespected him. But now they answered to him. And William Carter had made one thing very clear. Things would never be the same again. The station was no longer filled with laughter. The arrogant smirks, gone. The whispered jokes, dead. Instead, the officers stood in stiff, uneasy silence. Because now, they knew they had crossed the wrong man. And he wasn't just their boss. He was their lesson. Carter took a slow breath, letting the weight of the moment settle. Then he dropped the final bombshell. You all assumed I didn't belong here, that I was an outsider. He folded his arms. But here's what you didn't know. The room held its breath. Carter continued. I was born in this city, raised on the same streets you patrol. My father was a firefighter. My mother was a teacher. And me? His voice sharpened. I wore this uniform before half of you even knew what it meant to serve. Murmurs rippled through the station. Even Captain Harris looked surprised. Wait, you were a cop here before? He asked. Carter nodded. I started as a rookie in this very department, 30 years ago. Eyes widened. Some officers shifted uncomfortably. They hadn't just mocked a stranger. They had insulted one of their own. Carter paced slowly. I left this city to serve in different states, leading departments, cleaning up messes just like this one. He stopped, turning back to the officers. And now, I'm back. Because the mayor sent me here for one reason. His eyes darkened. To clean house. The words hung in the air like a storm cloud. Some officers shifted uneasily. Others kept their faces blank. Because they knew what that meant. Carter's appointment wasn't random. The department was broken. And he was here to fix it. This station has a reputation, Carter continued, and not a good one. His tone was sharp now. No more patience. I've heard the complaints, the misconduct reports, the stories. He let that sink in. Then he leaned forward slightly. And let me tell you something right now. The room held its breath. Carter's voice was ice. If you think I won't do something about it, you haven't done your homework. A few officers exchanged nervous glances, because now they weren't just embarrassed. They were afraid. And they should be. Carter exhaled, then gave them one final truth. I didn't come here to fire people. A few officers relaxed slightly. I came here to give you a choice. The room stilled. Carter held up 2 fingers. 1. You adapt. You grow. You learn how to serve this city with respect and integrity. His fingers curled into a fist. Or 2. You walk out that door today. Silence. Pure, stifling silence. No one dared move. Because for the first time, they were listening. And William Carter had made one thing very clear. This was his department now. And things were about to change. The station had never been this quiet. No one dared to whisper, smirk, or make a joke. Because now, they understood. This wasn't just a new boss. This was a reckoning. Carter took a deep breath and walked toward the front of the station. His boots echoed against the tiled floor. The officers watched his every step, waiting, wondering what would happen next. Finally, he turned. This is how things are going to work from now on. His voice was steady. Firm respect is not optional. It is the standard. Some officers lowered their heads. Others nodded slowly. You will treat every citizen in this community with dignity, regardless of who they are, what they look like, or how much money they have. A few officers fidgeted. Because those words, they hit hard. We will not abuse our badges. We will not abuse our power. We will not abuse our people. Carter's eyes swept across the room. And if you can't handle that, He pointed to the door. "There's your way out." A heavy pause. Then the first officer stepped forward. Officer Bradley, the same man who had mocked Carter when he walked in. He swallowed hard. "Sir." He hesitated. "I was out of line today." Carter didn't blink. "Yes, you were." Bradley's jaw tightened. "But I want to do better." Silence. Then Carter nodded once. "Then do better." Relief flashed across Bradley's face. "Yes, sir." One by one, officers stepped forward. Some mumbled apologies. Some simply nodded in agreement. A few, however, they stood with their arms crossed, refusing to admit their mistakes. And Carter saw them. But he didn't say a word, because he knew they wouldn't last long. Captain Harris, who had remained quiet for most of the meeting, finally spoke. "Chief Carter." He stepped forward, clearing his throat. "I want you to know I'm with you." Carter studied him for a moment. "Are you?" Harris didn't flinch. "Yes, sir." Then he did something no one expected. He turned to the rest of the department. "We've needed this change for a long time. And if any of you don't see that..." He gestured toward the door. "Then get out of the way." His words sent a shockwave through the room, because now there was no excuse. A few officers muttered under their breath. Then one of them stepped forward. Officer Daniels, the same man who had laughed the loudest. But he wasn't stepping forward to apologize. His arms were crossed, his jaw tight. And then he pulled off his badge. He set it down on the desk. "I don't answer to people like you." A sharp inhale cut through the room. But Carter didn't react. He simply nodded. "Then leave." Daniels hesitated. He had expected a fight. But Carter, he wasn't going to beg him to stay. So, with one final glare, Daniels turned on his heel and walked out. A few other officers followed. Not many, but enough. And Carter didn't stop them. Because this wasn't a department for them anymore. As the last officer left, Carter exhaled. He turned back to the room. There were still so many who had stayed. The ones who were willing to change. The ones who were ready to build something better. He nodded once. "Then let's get to work." And just like that, the first day of a new police department had begun. One built on respect. One built on integrity. One built on real leadership. And William Carter, he was the chief this city needed. William Carter walked into that station as a nobody in their eyes. They mocked him. They disrespected him. They thought he didn't belong. But by the end of the day, they stood before him, answering to him. Because real leadership isn't about power, it's about respect. And the ones who couldn't handle it walked out. The ones who stayed learned a lesson they would never forget. So now, let's ask you, have you ever been judged unfairly? How did you handle it? What would you have done if you were in Chief Carter's place? Let us know in the comments. And if this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. For more powerful, eye-opening stories like this, hit that subscribe button now. Thank you for watching, and remember, true respect is earned, not demanded. Until next time.